Hey, good morning, John. We
Hey,
have
good morning.
a whole bunch of questions. Security around Titan seems to be a rising area of interest. So, what does Titan do for security? Let's start out kind of like the basics, the authentication for how do we keep a website safe at a very basic level? What would we require people to log into the workstation, correct?
Yep.
And
Got a couple of layers of authentication security. We've got a way of storing and hashing passwords that is, pretty proprietary. So it always could be broken, but hasn't, in the 20 years that I've been here.
so our
So the way
passwords are
to,
encrypted in our storage area.
so we don't technically use encryption per se. We use a hashing mechanism. So it's a
Yeah.
type of cryptography, I suppose, but not strictly the same thing. Encryption implies that you can take a scrambled string and a reverse encryption and get the original.
Yes.
We use a hashing tool in that so you cannot know how to get back to what you provided in the first place. So the only way to know that it's valid is to hash two strings the same way, and if they're equal, then you put the right string in the first place. That's the kind of the main difference.
Interesting.
Encryption implies I'm going to store it in a jumbled way and then unjumble it later, and that's not how we do it.
Okay, so they're stored, passwords are stored there. You got a username and a password. When somebody logs in, they have to provide the username and password. We authenticate it using the hash, and nobody can hack into our database and steal all our passwords in order for this to work.
Well, yeah, if they were to steal passwords from our database, they wouldn't actually work unless they
Right.
knew how we hashed them in the first place.
Right.
And there's cryptographic tools like hashes and salts and things like this that we use a proprietary way. So
Okay.
if they had our managed code, then they'd be able to figure out how that worked. But just by grabbing the strings that are in the database, they wouldn't be able to know what
What about
it was
what
to
about
hack them.
somebody intercepting sitting online and watching the exchange of names and passwords? So if somebody was listening in on all our web traffic going back and forth, could they steal passwords that way?
So a man in the middle would, in theory, be able to know what somebody typed in. Yeah. So you'd have to, I'm trying to think on the display side, on the workstation side, there's always the encryption that happens on, for SSL.
We use
So,
HTTPS, and so
right,
the traffic is encrypted.
right. The end-to-end traffic is encrypted.
But if
So,
somebody had a keylogger on your desktop, they might be able
yeah.
to capture
So
anything.
if somebody was able to provide some malware via engineering and got some kind of backdoor onto your machine, and then you were browsing and logging into the workstation, then yeah, in theory, there'd be a way for them to capture those keylogging and then
So, so
report
I
that to
mean,
the
that's very rare and unlikely to happen. So we do have a higher level of security. We can secure the workstation with or type stuff with IP address restrictions.
Yep.
And so how does that work?
Yeah, for a lot of our hosted clients, that's the case, right? We've got development environments that only they can access. We know what their IP ranges are, and so that at a server level and a hardware level,
Yeah.
there's requests coming in from outside from external ranges wouldn't get through. They'd have to know, they'd have to be maybe spoofing a range or
You have
something
to be spoofing the IP address. So it gets more sophisticated to be able to get in. If you'd have to spoof an IP address range, steal the password, bypass the hash, and get in. So
Yep.
all right. So I mean, it's not impossible. So then
Not impossible.
we have for some select customers, we have some multi-factor authentication.
That's a very common, procedure. We've done that with an add-in. So
Okay.
I think for the display side and for the workstation,
Yeah.
um, we'd have to verify that. But I mean, that's essentially, hey, you've logged in. I'm going to email you the code at at your email address that's stored with your account information. You got to provide this one-time code back to me so I can prove that it was you because only you have your email, access to your email. Well, I mean, that's all. As soon as
Right.
somebody has access to your email, I suppose that's, that falls apart
Another
also.
way.
But
Right. So we're getting deeper and deeper. And we could, I don't know if any of our clients have requested, but we could also develop one of these authenticator apps where
right,
you have to provide on your iPhone that
right.
your Face ID is valid and it gives you a number, and then that number has to match on our end so that it's another layer, et cetera. So
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, what is the term for that? Pass keys or something like that, I think is
ASCII's
kind of
correct.
the industry term. Like your Dell computer, a lot of them now have fingerprint readers on them, and that integrates directly into Windows and probably other operating systems too, where
Right,
I'm managing the pass key based on your biometrics, right?
right.
So a lot of times, if I wanted to, I could have my Google Chrome, do some password storage, right? And Windows will say, "Hey, Chrome's asking for this. Quick, tell me, just scan your fingerprint." And then Chrome says, "Oh yeah, that's him." Okay, then it'll fill in the passwords, automatic. So there's a lot more, security infrastructure that's available today to people that never used to exist back in the day.
Yeah.
But but
So we
yeah,
have,
lots of ways that are technically outside of Titan, right? It's,
right.
some other mechanism that's providing do some kind of identity, verification. Yeah.
Yeah. So we go from basic passwords, which most of our clients do, and it's sufficient. And then as long as you're guarding your passwords, which we assume people do, to locking down IP address ranges, to more hardware level things, to
Yep.
um,
VPNs, the
VPNs,
whole,
having a VPN level inside there. And again, that's outside of Titan, but these are implementation stuff that we would support. And we have help people get this set up all the way up to multi-factor authentication. We also have single sign-on, which is just a little bit different. And so if you want to get into the Titan workstation and you are already authenticated to your corporate environment with
right.
whatever security levels you have over there, we can then pass those credentials. How does that work?
From a code perspective, the Titan's got a couple of extensible areas where you can provide managed code that knows about interacting with whatever your your network security choices, if it's Active Directory or whatever,
Yeah.
or like an Azure, thingamabob, or whatever your
OAuth. Yeah.
yeah,
Whatever your third
OAuth,
party.
whatever your authentication mechanism is, we can provide a class that knows about that technology stack and then accepts, whatever tokens,
Token. Right.
Kerberos or whatever the token is, that security structure. And then if it's valid, we can say, "Hey, is this valid?" I don't. You tell me. Oh yeah, he's valid, and then we go from there. And a lot of times it's then proxying as a user that we manage and store in our system. But since this external system said, "Yep, they're in," and then we can safely proxy as that person.
Okay.
Now, a lot of those directory, especially, they'll contain information about what types of things they're authorized to see or interact with, and that information, could boil down to groups, right?
Right.
Groups of users,
Yeah.
and then in Titan we could synchronize the information that we get from Active Directory or whatever,
So
and then provide extra layers of authorization, beyond the authentication step.
So then authentication means just logging in. But after that, then once you're into a Titan environment, like an intranet or a portal, what do you get to see? What rights do you have do you see the gold stuff or the silver stuff or the bronze stuff? What
Exactly.
range are you in? That could be passed in from the third party Active Directory or OAuth or whatever, wherever you're
Right.
managing that. Those
Right.
rights can be passed in and synchronized. And so not
And we
only
can do a lot. Yeah. On the identity federation side of things, I think that we've got external APIs that we've built.
So the ability to do that. So on the security front, we're, knock on wood, we have never been hacked. And so we do a pretty good job of locking down the important data. At least all the front doors are pretty secure. You are responsible. And
Yep.
in our hosted environments, we host in secured locations and on secured servers. And they have robust malware protection,
Yep.
hacking, intrusion detection,
Yep.
denial of service protection. All of those things are in place on our hosting environments.
Yep. And as a matter of process, I mean, the unique thing about Titan is the ability to integrate custom code, right? Anytime you integrate custom code, there's always a chance that somebody, maybe wrote something poorly or had some kind of, vulnerability or is using a technology that has a vulnerability, right?
Right.
So, I mean, from a process side, we've got pretty stringent processes as far as code reviews and and dealing with debugging and trying to identify potential vulnerabilities in a way that something is implemented, so that we typically try to avoid doing anything that would be susceptible to, like, like SQL injection attacks or, it's like replay attacks,
Right.
things like that. So there's a lot of industry standard, approaches and processes to go through to
We
make
also
sure that we're
see,
doing things properly.
the slight tangent, but on the same front, on the public sites, we have search logs. We keep track of all the queries that people are searching for whatever product or service you offer. We see in those logs SQL injection attacks, JavaScript attacks regularly. And what do we do to prevent those from executing?
Well, it's an old school way to do it. And I mean, the old ways still work a lot of times in different sites. But if you tried to inject something that would interact with a database, using, structured query language type approach, a lot of times you could try to pass that on a query string. Some sites will,
Right.
accept, random strings on the address bar and then do something with them.
So it's abc.com / and then SQL statement is actually inside there, a database
Right.
statement.
Yep. Question mark. And then some SQL statement that probably starts with 1 = 1 semicolon, and then blah, 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 blah. Something that would, if it was injected right into a SQL query, would, stop processing of it and then execute the rest of the query. Now, and theoretically try to expose some information from the database, right? That's the goal. Well, we sanitize what comes in on the query string, pretty strictly. So things that look like they could be script tags, things that look like they could be SQL queries, we scrub those and they
They're
don't
not
get
getting anywhere. You see,
right.
you parse all that stuff and then it's all gets filtered out and thrown away.
And then on top of it, we write code that wouldn't work if it got in anyways.
Right.
So we use a lot of stored procedure calls that have business logic built into them versus dynamic queries, right? That something where if I let somebody put in an apostrophe and then write something else and have it, overflow a buffer or run and execute random code, well, we don't do that. So
it wouldn't
right.
work.
It
And
wouldn't
then on
work.
the search box, if somebody types those query strings into the local search that's on a website,
Yep.
also we sanitize and scrub that.
Yep, we sanitize and scrub it and then log it. So a lot of times, and this is a pretty recent feature actually, when we changed Smart Search 4 timeframe, we added searches. You could actually see what people are typing in the box that looks like totally sus. I'm like, wait a second, what is this? All right, well, maybe I better go to my IIS logs and verify some of the sources of these requests. Maybe do a little bit extra, filtering, at the IP level or what have you. And the searches don't manifest or produce anything. So it's like, okay, I know this is happening on my site, but nothing. I'm glad that everything is safe and sound with my data. I'm just going to clean these up so they don't, clutter up my logs anymore. And
yeah. Another vulnerability is on the forms. So somebody's typing into the form, and instead of putting your first name, last name, they put a JavaScript query in there, or submit some.
Well, yeah. And another common thing with forms is they're called open relay attacks.
Right.
So let's say you come across a form and it says, yeah, we need your name and your email address, and provide us some feedback about our product or whatever. Well, a normal person's going to put in their own address, but a nefarious user is going to put in your address, Pat, and it's going to try to socially engineer you into clicking their link, and they're going to put in the feedback form a whole bunch of content and spam you because they're hoping and anticipating that whatever the back end for this form is going to send you an email with all the stuff that I put into this form on your behalf. And then hopefully it'll all go through. Well, our form block isn't built that way. We don't want open relay attacks.
It won't work. Right.
Yeah. So we don't ever send any of the content in a form to somebody who's, who isn't somebody who was configured in our system, basically. Right. So
we also, do we scrub out in the form if it was like a text block? Do we scrub out JavaScript and other SQL stuff that somebody might embed there?
Yep, exactly. Yep. Okay. We don't let anything that looks like it could be an XML tag or an HTML tag or a script tag or don't allow any of that to come through.
And I guess so. All right. Well, I think that's many things I can think of as how people could hack sites. We can't help you from people socially engineering your employees and saying, hey, this is This is John from Human Resources. I need your password so we can reset it and get access to your bank account. And you say, oh my gosh, I better be helpful. That's, you got to train your people to how to ignore those things and or filter those out in your email server. So Titan can't help you with that, but can say stay vigilant.
Yep.
There's
And we provide some of the more, common experiences like CAPTCHAs, right?
right.
So
Yes. Right.
people have gotten used to saying, no, I'm not a robot. So some of the common, tools for helping
Right.
protect against bots and spam, we've got all those too.